Welcome to NTD News. Kevin Hogan here. Let's have a look at today's top stories. Democrat lawmakers tour a border facility housing migrant children in Texas, but only one TV crew is allowed in. Senator Ted Cruz criticizes President Biden for what he calls a media blackout. A relative gives out new information on the personal life of the alleged shooter in Boulder, Colorado, and the man is expected to make his first court appearance today. A government watchdog says it is investigating President Joe Biden. It's over his executive order to stop construction of the border wall. Some Republicans say Congress already funded the project and the order violates the separation of powers. The House holds a hearing on extremism in the military. An officer testifies that military training material labels Catholics and evangelical Christians religious extremists. The head of Facebook speaks on reforming internet law before heading to Congress. Big tech CEOs are looking to lessen their liability from posts on their platforms. A group of Democrat lawmakers give their reactions after touring a border facility housing children yesterday. One lawmaker says she knows what it's like.
A Texas border facility for migrant children opened its doors to Democrat lawmakers Wednesday. Only one TV crew was allowed in. One lawmaker who was born in Guatemala says she was in the same predicament as these children.
When I look at their faces, I see myself coming here as a child, being sent to live here with my uncle. But what I saw here today and being on this trip was about transparency and was about accountability.
Another lawmaker there was the first formerly undocumented immigrant to serve in Congress. He said more needs to be done.
I think that we need to work harder to ensure that we connect these children with their families. There's a lot of reasons why that's not happening quick enough.
On Wednesday, President Biden put Vice President Kamala Harris in charge of stemming the flow of migration to the U.S. And Senator Ted Cruz says he and 17 Republicans will tour the border Friday. He criticized Biden for barring reporters from going to the border.
Joe Biden is issuing this media blackout because he's terrified of the American people seeing the disaster that is unfolding. We are fighting for the media that you have a right to be there. You have a right to have cameras there.
Under former President Trump, immigration sent unaccompanied minors back to their home countries. But Republicans say Biden's decision to release minors into the United States is serving as a magnet for more illegal aliens.
It is not compassionate to have a system that incentivizes and causes more little boys, more little girls to be put in the custody of human traffickers. These children are being physically abused, far too many of them, and it is Joe Biden's policies that is causing the abuse of these children.
Last week, a Biden official said the number of migrants arriving at the border is on pace to be the highest in 20 years. The Pentagon says it's looking at more sites to house young migrants. Health and Human Services will be responsible for the children.
Former State Secretary Mike Pompeo talked about two threats to the U.S., the southern border and China. He urges the Biden administration to send the "don't come" message clearly through actions instead of words.
The former State Secretary Mike Pompeo criticized the Biden administration's failure on the southern border. He said the clear message needs to be sent out with consistency.
President Biden has said we don't want them to come, but every action that they've taken, every action has suggested that if you come and if you get here, you will find a way to find work and find opportunity and be able to stay here forever. When that's the case, they're not going to listen to American messaging.
Under the Trump administration, the U.S. and Mexico set a cooperative system to keep asylum seekers outside the U.S. border.
If you want to apply for asylum, there's a set of rules. Comply with them. But while you're waiting, you're going to remain in Mexico.
Pompeo also responded to last week's U.S.-China talk. He said the Chinese Communist Party is spreading the misinformation that America is in decline. It is attacking the fundamental nature of the U.S.
But it's fundamentally untrue, and the Chinese want the world to believe that, because if we're in decline, then other countries will want to be their friends. They'll be fearful that the United States won't be there.
During the first high-level meeting under the Biden administration, Chinese diplomats lashed out over the U.S.'s struggling democracy and poor treatment of minorities. Pompeo warned the current administration to be cautious of the communism ideology trap.
So I would urge this administration, when your Chinese counterpart says that Black lives matter, is a central part of your administration, when a Marxist-Leninist ideology is a center point of your administration, you have to push back on that.
Pompeo said he hopes the Biden administration will not sacrifice American values on the cross of radical woke leftism to keep American interests first. Lin, NTD News.
The man who allegedly shot and killed 10 people in Boulder, Colorado, is a loner who lived in his basement. That's according to one of his relatives. Ahmad Alissa is expected to make his first appearance in court today. Ahmad Alissa's brother-in-law told The Sun about the alleged shooter in Boulder, Colorado. He said Alissa lived in his family's basement in the neighboring Arvada, and he never had many friends nor a girlfriend. A woman who worked in the King Soopers pharmacy describes the horrifying experience being so close to the shooter.
It was pretty intense. You know, right before we left, we had just figured out that this man had been hunkering down in front of us for probably at least a good 20 minutes, and right in front of the pharmacy. And it was crazy to notice that once when they were telling him to surrender, and he said he was surrendering before he walked out. He was just sitting there, you know, and then you hear him be escorted out. SWAT comes in, make sure you're okay, and when you're being escorted, it's just difficult there.
Mourners gathered at a memorial outside of the King Soopers grocery store. A man played a somber tune on the cello in remembrance of the fallen. The 21-year-old who allegedly carried out the rampage prepared for his first day in court on Thursday morning. Alissa received treatment for a leg injury after law enforcement arrested him inside the supermarket on Monday. He has since been jailed for investigation of murder. He is set to hear the charges he faces and his rights as a defendant. He won't be asked whether he pleads guilty or innocent until later in the case. An appeals court rules that states can restrict people from openly carrying firearms in public. It upholds a Hawaii regulation that bans residents from openly carrying guns without a license. The court ruled 7-4 that restrictions on carrying guns in public do not violate the Second Amendment's right to bear arms. The majority opinion said that the Second Amendment doesn't give people a right to carry arms openly in public. A dissenting judge said the ruling is as unprecedented as is extreme, and that the Second Amendment allows law-abiding citizens to carry handguns outside the home for self-defense. The Biden administration is arguing to the Supreme Court that the police can seize guns in homes without a warrant. The case at hand comes after an argument between a couple, but the court seems skeptical of this government expansion. The husband in the case has no criminal history and no record of violence, but in an escalated argument with his wife, he said, "Just shoot me," and placed an unloaded gun on the table. The police took away his 2 handguns without a warrant, saying they were afraid he may try to commit suicide or harm others. In a brief submitted to the Supreme Court, the Biden administration says this situation can bypass the Fourth Amendment's warrant requirement under community caretaking or law enforcement acts to prevent harm in emergency situations. But several justices voiced concern. Justice Sotomayor said it was dangerous to let police search and seize without standards. A Marine Corps officer testifies in Congress about efforts to root out extremism in the military. He says a military training manual identifies Catholics and evangelical Christians as religious extremists.
Michael Berry testified to the House Armed Services Committee. He says religious believers are targeted and lumped together with extremists.
And the U.S. Army produced training materials that labeled evangelical Christians and Catholics as religious extremists alongside Hamas and Al-Qaeda. Never mind the fact that evangelicals and Catholics continue to comprise a majority of those serving in uniform today.
Berry says this creates a hostile work environment for religious believers and makes them feel unwelcome. Witnesses and committee members struggled to define extremism. They also didn't show evidence or data about the problem. Representative Mike Rogers says people claim there is a serious problem without evidence.
It's also important to point out that we lack any concrete evidence that violent extremism is as rife in the military as some commentators claim.
Rogers says they also lack a definition for extremism.
If this committee is going to attempt to address this issue, we need to be clear about what examining extremism means. Over the past few years, other committees have grappled with this issue of extremism and domestic terrorism. They run into the same problem over and over. the First Amendment.
The Democrat chairman of the hearing also couldn't provide a definition.
We do have a problem, and that becomes the challenge here. What, as I said at the outset, what is extremism? What is legitimate political views?
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in a department video that he's experienced extremism in the military, but he didn't offer any examples. He's ordered all troops to stand down and discuss it.
Facebook chief executive Mark Zuckerberg laid out steps to reform a key internet law on Wednesday. He says companies should have immunity from liability, but only if they follow what he's calling best practices for removing damaging material from their platforms.
Ahead of a Thursday hearing on Capitol Hill with top social media CEOs, Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg argued companies such as his should not be liable for content shared by users, as long as those companies followed best practices. At stake is what's known as Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. It's a 1996 law limiting the liability of internet platforms for content shared on their sites. In the text of his opening statement shared Wednesday, Zuckerberg said firms such as Facebook should act to take down harmful posts. But he cautioned, quote, platforms should not be held liable if a particular piece of content evades its detection. That would be impractical for platforms with billions of posts per day. The hearing is titled Disinformation Nation: Social Media's Role in Promoting Extremism and Misinformation.
Reporters Without Borders is suing Facebook in France for allowing hate speech against journalists. They're also suing the company for violating its own rules on the spread of CCP virus disinformation. The Government Accountability Office is investigating if President Joe Biden has the power to stop construction of the border wall. Some Republican Congress members argue Congress already funded the project, and the president doesn't have the authority to cancel it. 4 Republican senators and 60 Congress members signed a letter requesting an investigation. Now the Government Accountability Office confirms they're looking into the situation. Senator Roy Blunt pointed out Biden served in Congress for a long time. He says Biden knows he's breaking the rules. Former President Donald Trump made the border wall a key campaign promise. Approximately 450 miles of wall are completed. Biden reversed several of Trump's executive orders on immigration as soon as he took office. Biden says the wall is wasteful spending. Critics say Biden's policies are fueling a surge of illegal immigration and causing a humanitarian crisis at the southern border. Another coalition of states is suing the Biden administration. This comes in addition to multi-state lawsuits over pipeline cancellations and immigration policies. NTD's Allison Lee has the latest.
Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry is leading a coalition of 13 states in a lawsuit against the Biden administration. Wyoming is also filing a separate suit for the same reason.
This morning, on behalf of the state of Louisiana, I filed a suit against the Biden administration for effectively banning oil and gas activity that supports businesses, employs our workers, and also, as importantly, funds our coastal restoration projects.
A week after coming into office, President Biden signed an executive order halting oil and natural gas leases on federal lands and offshore waters. It will also launch a rigorous review of all existing leasing. Biden says this is to tackle climate change, but Landry sees it differently.
That is destroying thousands of families' livelihoods, leaves the working poor without the means to fuel their cars or to heat their homes. And then he concedes our energy policy and national security to the whims of other countries.
Attorneys general from 12 other states are joining this lawsuit. The state of Wyoming filed its own lawsuit over Biden's oil and gas halt. Landry calls it the Biden ban.
So again, this Biden ban now, we see a pattern, picks winners and losers. So it's okay for drilling to occur on Native American lands, but it's not okay for Americans to be able to drill on federal lands, completely contradicting the administration's alleged environmental concerns.
Landry calls the Biden policy an aggressive, reckless abuse of presidential power and an attack on American energy independence. Last week, a coalition of 21 states sued Biden for halting the XL Keystone pipeline. Arizona and Texas separately sued Biden for his deportation freeze. And an alliance for oil workers sued Biden for his drilling halt in late January. Allison Lee, NTD News.
Two people from the energy industry are speaking out against shutting down an oil pipeline in Michigan. They say it could hurt the lives of the people living there. NTD's Don Tran has the details.
Line 5, a pipeline in Michigan that moves oil and natural gas, gained some notoriety over the past decade. And after canceling the construction of a pipeline in South Dakota, President Biden could have this one in his sights. But two Michigan energy workers testified in a state house hearing to oppose the shutdown.
A lot of consumers, individual consumers and businesses that rely on those traditional energy sources that are currently, for the most part, being supplied by Line 5.
The Michigan Propane Gas Association says the state is one of the top users of propane. Over half of all propane comes from Line 5. Tomaszewski said the shutdown would lead to a supply shock and chaos, given that other infrastructure to transport energy could not fill that demand.
We need to invest capital and build terminals and, rail and we need the actual physical tanker trucks, and we need the pressurized rail cars. We don't have enough assets available and enough labor available.
People supporting the shutdown argue that the pipeline is a danger to the environment. In 2010, Line 5 burst and spilled crude oil into the Kalamazoo River. But one of the witnesses cited a report in 2019 from the Department of Transportation that found pipelines spilled less crude oil than rail and truck.
Covered an ample period, a 10-year period, and definitely showed that pipeline is our safest way. Has the lowest percentage of leakage. Yes, everything, or not to say everything, but there are incidences, but overall, that's our safest way to transport our energy products.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer released a plan to heat homes without depending on Line 5 to deliver propane. Meanwhile, Canada's Natural Resource Minister says the country will fight to keep Line 5 in operation. Don Tran, NTD News.
Former President Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, may be running for office. She told Fox News she is absolutely considering a run for the Senate in her home state, North Carolina. Some believe she would be a challenging candidate to run against. Rumors of her candidacy surfaced as early as last November, and they resurfaced after retiring Republican Senator Richard Burr voted to convict her father-in-law in the Senate impeachment trial. Donald Trump also publicly nudged her to run at an event at his Mar-a-Lago resort. The North Carolina GOP chairman told the Epoch Times that Lara Trump would be the candidate to beat if she decided to run. That view is shared by a number of Trump insiders and pollsters. And just ahead, one first responder is found to have paid the ultimate price to save others. His remains recovered inside an assisted living facility where he helped rescue elderly residents from a fire. Find out more in just a minute on NTD News. Officials have identified a firefighter who died trying to save elderly residents in New York. He perished in a blaze at an assisted living facility. They say 35-year-old Jared Lloyd, who has been listed as missing, died in the fire in Spring Valley. The Evergreen Court home partially collapsed in on the fire early on Tuesday. Lloyd was among the firefighters who went inside to rescue at least 20 residents who couldn't get out. Fire officials said Lloyd then got lost and issued a mayday call, but other firefighters couldn't find him. His remains were recovered Tuesday night. One blaze left one resident dead, and 13 others were hospitalized. But a county executive says more than 100 others are still alive thanks to Lloyd and other brave responders. New Yorkers usually have something to say about the city's transit system, and it's not always good. But now it looks like there's light at the end of the train tunnel. NTD's Arian Pastar has the story.
Up here, New York City subway system looks pretty modern, right? But if you go on the ground and ride one of the trains, it's kind of like traveling back in time. Parts of the system were built before the First World War, and they haven't been changed much since. But now the MTA's made some historic improvements, partly because of the pandemic. One of the main changes was upgrading the timer signals. Those signals have been around as long as the subway system itself. It automatically activates the emergency brakes of a train if it's going over the speed limit. The MTA says in 2020 it upgraded 900 of those signals with digital timers. That was possible thanks to record low ridership amid the pandemic. Although the MTA is often criticized in New York, the people we spoke with were mostly satisfied with the system. But all agree one thing should be improved.
They get me from point A to point B, so...
I mean, it gets me places. So as long as I get somewhere, I guess I'm good. But it could be a bit cleaner.
The trains are not nearly as clean as they tell us they are.
Sanitation, man. We should work on the cleanliness, to be honest. We should be more friendly on the MTA, too.
Transit has identified over 660 speed limits that could be raised. Almost 600 of those locations have already been evaluated by safety and engineering teams. The speed limit is now more than twice as high as it used to be in some sections. One report even says that running times could be cut by an average of 5.5 minutes. But that's only possible if every newly implemented system works exactly as planned. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
Southwest Airlines is scrapping its pandemic policy of boarding passengers in smaller groups. Now it's resumed traditional boarding procedures. The nation's largest domestic carrier began boarding passengers in groups of 30 on March 15th. The company doesn't assign seats. It had been boarding passengers in groups of 10 since it unveiled its Southwest Promise health and safety protocols in May. But Southwest isn't the first airline to revert to pre-pandemic procedure. In early March, JetBlue stopped boarding passengers from back to front and resumed its standard boarding method by groups. United and Delta still have pandemic boarding policies in place, while American Airlines never changed its boarding procedures. A Wright brothers moment is coming, but this time it's on Mars. Next month, NASA says the Ingenuity Mars helicopter will attempt its first powered flight. Before the historic liftoff, Ingenuity has to complete a series of steps over the next 2 weeks. Until then, the helicopter is tucked beneath the rover and attached to its power supply. Ingenuity will have 31 days to conduct a series of test flights. For its first flight, the helicopter will lift about 10 feet off the ground and hover for about 30 seconds before landing. Flight on Mars is difficult because of the red planet's thin atmosphere. The planet also receives just half the solar energy Earth does during the daytime. And fitting the mission, a postage stamp-sized piece of muslin fabric that covered one of the wings from the Wright brothers flyer is attached to a cable beneath the helicopter's solar panel. And coming up, in California, a group forms to protect Asian residents in its community from hate crimes. The leader says he feels a personal responsibility to protect the vulnerable. And a Grammy Award-winning artist records a gospel album during lockdown. He says creating it was like a form of therapy and helped him get through the difficult year. More on that on NTD News.
The glory of piano masterpieces from the Baroque, Classical, and Romantic periods. New Tang Dynasty Television invites you to join the 2021 NTD International Piano Competition. Together, we preserve and revitalize the art of authentic classical piano music. October 2021 in New York City. Register now at piano.ntdtv.com.
The boyfriend of a woman who went missing in the Virgin Islands told reporters no comment when asked about the investigation. Reporters found him out walking his dog.
Our current challenges facing the search, I would assume most importantly, is the fact that to this point, I do not know of a forensic team has been on the vessel that she went missing from that's in the background behind me.
Daily Mail reporters asked 44-year-old Ryan Bain whether or not he would allow authorities to search his boat, but he walked away without answering. After initial interviews, Bain refused to cooperate further with authorities. Bain reported 41-year-old Sarm Heslop missing from his boat on March 8th, but he waited over 9 hours when police asked him to report the incident to the Coast Guard. Bain told authorities that he found her missing after an alarm woke him up. Heslop's family said they are shocked and distraught and asked local authorities to ramp up the search. Residents in San Jose are coming together to help the greater good. They formed a community patrol group to step up and help keep their neighborhoods safe. Here are the details.
As hate crimes against Asian Americans surge across the United States, one group of community organizers in San Jose, California, is stepping up to protect their community. A group of volunteers has formed. They call themselves Japantown Prepared and patrol the streets of San Jose day in and out, lending a helping hand wherever needed, greeting community residents, and warning everyone to stay vigilant. Group leader Richard Saito says he feels a personal responsibility to protect the most vulnerable, particularly the elderly.
I see the attacks on the news, and it breaks my heart to see that. See innocent seniors being attacked and knocked down, and then we had the one die. And then I get angry that people take out their aggressions on unsuspecting, undeserving, defenseless people. So it makes me want to do things, something.
But the group serves as more than just a friendly face around the neighborhood. Along with outreach patrols, speaking to community elders, Saito points out the community's history and landmarks. The Nikkei lantern, which bears a torch that symbolizes eternal hope, is inscribed with the date February 19, 1942, when the U.S. ordered the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II.
Well, it's kind of sad on one aspect. You'd like to think that we made some progress, but unfortunately, when people are under a lot of stress, they lash out, they scapegoat, they marginalize people, and it's probably a human reaction.
Saito says the response to the Japantown Prepared initiative has been overwhelmingly positive so far, with some 20 volunteers and counting.
California will be allowing visitors into prisons next month. NTD's Eileen Eng has more.
After a year, California state prisons will allow limited in-person visits with inmates starting April 10th. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation Secretary said they realized the importance of maintaining family and community ties. She added that they have worked hard to let inmates have visitors as quickly and as safely as possible. Each institution may decide on the date they are ready to resume in-person visits. The visits will be limited, and there will be new protocols like temperature checks, COVID-19 testing, physical distancing, and face coverings. All 35 prisons will continue video visiting. There are currently 32 active cases of the virus across the state's prisons. 22 prisons report 0 cases. Eileen Eng, NTD News, California.
A new survey found sports fans are ready to cheer on their favorite teams in person again. The company, Oracle Food and Beverage, surveyed 1,000 Americans about whether they'll return to stadiums. More than half of the people asked say they plan to return to watching sports in stadiums within the first 4 months after they reopen. 32% said they'll be back in stadiums immediately. Sports venues across the country have started to reopen, but with limited numbers of fans attending games. 56% of the people in the survey say social distancing measures should remain in place as fans go back into stadiums. It's been a hard year for performing artists and musicians, but one Grammy Award-winning musician spent the last year keeping the faith. NTD's Andrew Thomas has more on the singer's latest project.
My life has changed.
Harry Connick Jr. showcases his spiritual side in his new album, Alone with My Faith. He created the album solo in his home studio during the pandemic. He played all the instruments, recorded all background vocals, and did all the engineering. The singer said the process was therapeutic during such uncertain times.
Normally on an album when I record, I love the recording process so much, but it doesn't necessarily act as such a therapy for me. This was a case where the music itself was actually helping me get through this time.
The New Orleans native described the 13-track project as a mix of Christian and faith-based music, made to help listeners access their faith after this tumultuous past year. Connick Jr. said the album is an honest look at how most people navigated life during lockdown.
I have so many friends and people in my life that were feeling what I was feeling, trying to get in touch with their faith, but not necessarily from a Christian perspective. So I'd say about half the record is definitely that, but the other half is kind of intended for anybody who was dependent on their faith to help get them through.
Connick Jr.'s 24-year-old daughter, Georgia, took the photos and directed 2 music videos for the album. He said the partnership went smoothly. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And soon, North Korea launched 2 more missiles that landed in the sea near Japan. Japan's prime minister wants to talk with the U.S. about it. And communist China appears to deem H&M unfashionable. The retail giant is in trouble with the regime over an old social media post. Find out more on NTD News. North Korea launched 2 ballistic missiles into the sea near Japan on Thursday. That's according to Japan's prime minister. This is fueling tension ahead of the Tokyo Olympics and ramping up pressure on the Biden administration as it finalizes its policy toward North Korea.
Japan's leader says North Korea launched 2 ballistic missiles into the sea near his country on Thursday, a step up from a weekend test of shorter-range weapons and adding new pressure onto the Biden White House. The Japanese government said one missile flew about 260 miles, pointing to a short-range missile. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga told reporters he would bring up the launch next month in a visit to Washington.
The first launch in only less than a year represents a threat to peace and stability in Japan and the region and violates UN resolutions.
He also added he would work to ensure a safe and secure Olympics, now set for late July. UN Security Council resolutions ban North Korea from testing ballistic missiles. North Korea has not tested a nuclear weapon or its longest-range intercontinental ballistic missile since 2017, ahead of a historic meeting in Singapore between leader Kim Jong-un and former U.S. President Donald Trump in 2018. Senior U.S. officials told Reuters this week Biden officials are in the final stages of reviewing their North Korea policy.
And 2 more Virginia counties passed resolutions last night condemning the Chinese Communist Party's forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience. The counties are now joining a national and global effort to end the Communist Party's brutal human rights violations. NTD's Melina Weiskup brings us more from Virginia.
Here in Virginia's Spotsylvania County tonight, board members passed a resolution to condemn the Chinese government's forced organ harvesting against prisoners of conscience. Over the past decade, reports have uncovered that the CCP has been killing prisoners of conscience to supply its organ transplantation industry. Many of the harvested organs come from people who are persecuted for their beliefs, such as Falun Dafa practitioners.
My husband died from the persecution. I'm family broken. The business lost.
Jailed for 7 years for practicing Falun Gong, thankfully, she wasn't one of the tens of thousands who fell prey to the regime's organ harvesting abuse.
To criminalize someone just to take something that is so precious to their life is just inhumane.
Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors that it condemns in the strongest possible terms the persecution of Falun Gong and the state-sponsored organ harvesting of all prisoners of conscience currently being carried out by the Chinese Communist regime.
And every day, more and more Americans are taking a stance against this inhumane act.
Let's stand up and be strong and say, stop it.
This Virginia county is the 9th county in the state to pass such a resolution against the CCP's human rights abuses.
And we don't want anything like this to go unnoticed. So you started at the local level, and it works its way up. The grassroots campaigns have been very successful here in Virginia, and we want to see if this one can take off and go forward.
The U.S. Congress already passed a resolution, but it hasn't made it to the Senate floor yet. But efforts at the federal level have resurfaced again. Congress members introduced a bipartisan bill dubbed the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act. And House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has voiced support for it.
I would hope our country, our State Department, would do something to support these people here who are trying to stop that.
And it doesn't stop with the U.S. Global efforts are underway too. For example, Israeli prohibits insurance companies from reimbursing transplants received in countries that violate Israeli organ trade and trafficking guidelines. But activists say further international efforts are needed to combat the ongoing atrocity.
So the fundamental situation is the CCP live harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners' organ has not been stopped.
He says organizations like the WHO have been working with the CCP to deceive the world, and world leaders cannot turn a blind eye to this reality. And with more and more of these types of resolutions being passed on both the local and federal levels, many are hopeful that change is just around the corner. Reporting in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
H&M is under fire in China. The retailer now faces a boycott there over an old social media post that called attention to the regime's human rights abuses. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has more on the story.
Swedish clothing brand H&M is now under social media attack in China. That's because one of its old social media posts showed concerns over forced labor in Communist China's Xinjiang region. At least one Chinese online retailer appeared to have dropped H&M's products. H&M said in a statement last year that it was, quote, deeply concerned by reports from civil society organizations and media that include accusations of forced labor. H&M's official store on Chinese e-commerce platform Alibaba Tmall was not accessible on Wednesday. China is H&M's fourth biggest market. It made close to $340 million in the 12 months through November 2020. CCP mouthpiece CCTV attacked the Swedish company, saying, quote, H&M, you are no longer at all fashionable. Some people on Chinese social media platform Weibo are calling for H&M to leave China. Some are also calling to boycott it. On Wednesday, H&M China issued an announcement in response. It says H&M values the Chinese market and will have long-term investments there. At the same time, it will continue to comply with OECD guidelines for responsible business conduct. The guideline has a new chapter on human rights. A number of new YouTube accounts recently popped up online, but their video content has been raising suspicions about just who runs them. The channels are publishing clips showing what they depict as the happy, full lives of Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities in China's Xinjiang region. The videos claim people there can move and act freely in that region. But Uyghurs and members of other ethnic minority groups who live outside China told Radio Free Asia about their side of the story. Dina belongs to the Kazakh minority and used to live in the Yili area of Xinjiang. Now she lives in Kazakhstan. She said in her hometown, students were asked to take videos praising the good life in Xinjiang after graduation. These videos were then sent to overseas websites. The project was organized by local officials. The spokesman of the World Uyghur Congress told the outlet that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to beautify its systematic suppression in Xinjiang, and it's using media resources to do it. YouTube is banned in China. It is common knowledge there that the only way to access it is through using special software to break through the regime's censorship firewall. The only other option means getting a special permit from authorities and posting content in line with the regime's narrative. The Chinese regime's People's Liberation Army, or PLA, will begin a massive loyalty campaign. It will foster loyalty to the Communist Party and its leader, Chairman Xi Jinping. It's part of the celebrations for the party's 100th anniversary this year. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, will celebrate the PLA's Hong Kong garrison, but there will be no mass parades as is usually the case. A PLA Major General kicked off the anniversary celebrations on Tuesday. He said at a press conference that the military must, quote, resolutely listen to Chairman Xi's command, be accountable to Chairman Xi, let Chairman Xi rest assured. From now to the party's anniversary on July 1st, every soldier will receive education on party history. That is to make sure they can be, quote, loyal to the core, uphold the core, and follow the core. The core in CCP language refers to the party leadership with Xi at the center. Li added that the education is aimed at making sure soldiers, quote, appreciate the glorious truth about Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics.
And still to come, the Suez Canal is one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. Find out why the current canal blockage is so critical to world trade. Ghost Kitchens answered the demand for food delivery amid the pandemic. A company based in the United Arab Emirates says it has doubled the number of restaurants it works with from last year. Find out more in just a moment.
Do you have a life insurance policy you no longer need? Now you can sell your policy, even a term policy, for an immediate cash payment. Call Coventry Direct to learn more.
We thought we had planned carefully for our retirement.
But we quickly realized we needed a way to supplement our income.
Our friends sold their policy to help pay their medical bills. And that got me thinking. Maybe selling our policy could help with our retirement.
I was skeptical. So I did some research and called Coventry Direct. They explained life insurance is a valuable asset that can be sold.
We learned we could sell all of our policy or keep part of it with no future payments. Who knew? We sold our policy. Now we can relax and enjoy our retirement as we had planned.
If you have $100,000 or more of life insurance, you may qualify to sell your policy. Don't cancel or let your policy lapse without finding out what it's worth. Visit CoventryDirect.com to find out if your policy qualifies, or call 1-800-509-8500. Coventry Direct, redefining insurance.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format, where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled, and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
The Suez Canal in Egypt is one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, so a traffic jam like the one caused by the over 200,000-ton container ship called Ever Given is really a big problem.
The Suez Canal is one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. About 12% of world trade by volume passes through the man-made channel connecting Europe and Asia. So, a traffic jam like the one caused by the 224,000-ton Ever Given container ship is rather a big problem, and could have a major impact on the global flow of oil and gas. Nearly 19,000 ships passed through the canal during 2020. That's an average of 51.5 ships per day. All that traffic adds up to about 1.17 billion tons, all squeezing through the man-made channel. Giant tankers and container ships carry everything from crude oil and refined products to finished goods like electronics and toys. The Suez Canal is also a major source of hard currency for Egypt. The country raked in $5.6 billion in tolls in 2020, despite global trade disruption elsewhere. The 120-mile-long canal separates the African continent from Asia. It also provides the shortest sea link between Asia and Europe and the lands lying around the Indian and Western Pacific Oceans. The first waterway was dug over 3,500 years ago, but significant enhancements came in the 19th century to link the Mediterranean with the Red Sea via the River Nile.
President Nasser announced that Egypt had taken over the Suez Canal, the international waterway of which Britain has been a large shareholder since Israel's dramatic...
In 1956, Egypt nationalized the canal, prompting shareholders Britain and France, along with Israel, to invade. The Suez crisis only ended after Egypt sank 40 ships in the channel, and the US, Soviet Union and UN intervened, forcing Britain, France and Israel to withdraw. The state-owned Suez Canal Authority was established in July 1956 and still runs the waterway. In June 1967, Egypt and some other Arab states fought Israel in what became known as the Six-Day War. The canal was very badly damaged in fighting and remained closed until after the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Egypt regained full control of the canal and it reopened in June 1975.
As England slowly reopens, the government is looking at whether people should have to provide proof of vaccination against the CCP virus through a vaccine passport. Some warn the idea brings legal and ethical challenges. Here's NTD's Jane Worrell with the story.
With more than 28 million people in the UK receiving their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, a parliamentary committee is reviewing the idea of a vaccine passport that would prove you've had the jab. It could give people more freedom and access to venues. The former Brexit secretary, though, has concerns that a domestic vaccine passport system would break the law.
Firstly, the impact of this would be discriminatory. Under the law, it would be indirectly discriminatory, and that is illegal. What this proposal does is, in effect, coerce those people, and that's also against a number of international conventions.
Also giving evidence to the committee on Tuesday was the director of civil liberty group Big Brother Watch, who similarly raised concerns about privacy and discrimination.
Bankruptcy and lockdown restrictions are forcing many shops in France to shut their doors forever. Even the Paris Fan Museum has not been spared. It's struggling to survive after being closed for months. NTD's David Vives has more.
This museum in Paris contains many treasures. Centuries-old fans are kept with care and displayed to visitors. Anne Hoget's family has been running this place since 1960, and the museum carries the history of those fans. She says the first fans ever made came from the East.
This one comes from China, Canton. It has been made in the 19th century.
After explorers first brought them to Europe in the 17th century, they became a luxury accessory for nobilities in the royal courts of Spain, France, and the UK. It takes several craftsmen 6 months to make one fan. They need to put all the pieces together, and the procedure has been the same since then.
I come from a family of tablet makers. I'm the 4th generation. The tablet is the base of the fan. It can be in wood, in mother of pearl, ivory.
When the tablet is done, a painter will design the drawing on the canvas. Following the evolution in painting throughout the 18th and the 19th century, older fans show scenes with divinities, such as this one called The Dance of Gods. Other fans show Baroque-style scenes and romantic scenes. Hoget says her clients are usually performing arts companies, filmmakers, and haute couture creators. That makes fan making a niche trade.
I continue to welcome art school students all the time.
Though she receives young trainees, Hoget says she hasn't found anyone that can take up her business. But this is not the biggest challenge for the 75-year-old woman. Despite her efforts, the museum faces a permanent close down.
Unfortunately, the COVID crisis made me close the museum. I was ordered to pay 117 euros to pay for the shop's rent, and March 22nd was my deadline.
She wrote to the mayor but did not get any help. Hoget launched an online crowdfunding for the fan museum a month ago. But she is still 60,000 euros short of preventing the collection of 2,500 fans from being the next victims of the CCP virus pandemic. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
The ghost kitchen concept is taking hold as takeout orders and delivery requests skyrocket. It's an all-in-one kitchen and delivery service. And one firm in Dubai says it's doubled the number of restaurant partners it worked with last year. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
Sushi, pizza, wraps, they're all coming from the same bustling ghost kitchen, and thousands of restaurants are experimenting with these virtual spin-offs. The demand for food delivery has surged during the pandemic. Third-party delivery companies like Deliveroo and Uber Eats have also raised expectations for speed and convenience. UAE-based Katopi takes the concept one step further by doing all the cooking too.
So the problem we're trying to solve for the restaurants is giving them the ability to grow without any capex needed or without the need to actually hire staff and manage the business themselves.
Once a restaurant partner is on board, its workers are trained to cook all of their dishes. They're prepared, packaged, and delivered from one of the firm's 60 kitchens, and business is booming. Bulaut says the firm has doubled the number of restaurant partners it worked with last year.
During the pandemic, half our restaurants were shut down because malls were shut down. And so we had to find vehicles of growth. We had to keep the business going. Katopi was a perfect foil in that they had...
Katopi is operational in the UAE, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Last month, it launched a new service in Jeddah and is looking to open 5 kitchens in the Saudi city before the end of this year. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And coming up, we see that people aren't the only ones who need to get outside during lockdown. A dog walker in London offers training and exercise to prevent behavioral problems. More on that in just a minute. Deep in the heart of Mexico, an animal sanctuary works to help protect neglected donkeys.
Burrolandia means donkey land in English. It's a sanctuary dedicated to protecting donkeys on the outskirts of Mexico City. These beasts of burden have traditionally been integral to farming and rural life. As technology improves and more people move to cities, some people living in Mexico have never seen a donkey. It's no longer useful in daily life. Donkey populations in Mexico have dwindled. Donkey Land has rescued dozens of donkeys suffering from abandonment or mistreatment.
Nobody has dedicated themselves to this. Nobody has dedicated time to a species of animals that provides no benefit to us. Also, they're well looked after, well loved.
These donkeys' days of physical labor are over as they roam the paddocks, eating carrot popsicles and enjoying TLC.
When they arrive here, it is like they are really arriving in paradise.
The sanctuary is open to the public. Visitors enjoy the donkeys' friendly natures. The director of Donkey Land hopes it will encourage people to protect a species that has been helping the people of Mexico survive and flourish for generations.
It's time for your daily dose of cute. Zoo Miami has unveiled its new arrival, an adorable, endangered baby rhinoceros. The male rhino calf was born back in February, but he and his mother have remained off exhibit since then so they could bond. The pregnancy lasted about 15 months. It was the mother's 4th time giving birth. Her name is Circe. She and the new calf's father, named Eddie, are both 21 years old. People aren't the only ones suffering under lockdown. In London, a dog walker offers strolls and high-intensity workouts to deal with dogs' increased behavioral problems during the pandemic. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
Albie the Bernese mountain dog knows it's the best time of the day when his dog walker Kendra Torgan comes to pick him up. Torgan, also known as Mrs. Bones, has been running a dog walking company in London for 10 years. Most dog owners have been spending a lot more time at home with their dogs during lockdown. Many have been walking their dogs themselves, which Torgan says could be contributing to behavioral issues.
What I've noticed is that there's a lot more separation anxiety, a lot more people calling me for recall because their dog's not coming back. Behavioral problems like with Angus, where they're overprotective of the parent because they've just spent so much time together.
As well as dog walking, Torgan offers training in puppy classes. With a huge surge in people buying lockdown puppies, Torgan says some people aren't fully aware of what it takes to raise and care for a dog. Some breeds also have a lot of energy, so she's hired a dog jogger. Torgan's dog jogger, Tom Frog, takes dogs on a 3-mile run lasting about 45 minutes.
So dog jogging is taking advantage of 2 things. If you like to exercise and you have a dog, put them together. I mean, whether it's about saving time or whether it's just wanting to spend time with your pet and, like I said, get exercise at the same time.
Battersea Dogs and Cats Home recently surveyed 2,000 dog and cat owners, including many novices. Almost half of new pet owners said they sometimes regret their decision. 73% said their regrets were due to training problems. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And that's all for now. Catch us again tonight at 6:30 Eastern. From New York City, I'm Kevin Hogan.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.